The connection between the origins of Sukuna and Yuji isn't as face value as it appears to be. Gege Akutami clearly had a deep understanding of Japanese and Hindu mythology, which of course went into the creation of these two characters. This is why you can't understand the true essence of Sukuna by just reading one story. His character is an amalgamation of multiple stories from different legends and tales. That's why in today's video I'll be covering every mythological source Gege took reference from when creating these characters, and then we can use that information to predict what comes next. Now, some of you guys might already be aware of the alleged real-life construction site incident that involved the discovery of the disfigured human, Ryumin Sukuna. We're going to get to that story as well, but I'd rather start with the oldest inspiration for the character, which would be the Assuras and Indra, the god of the Devas, from Hindu mythology. Now, the precursor being in Hindu mythology is called Brahma. He created several mind-born children. One of them, called Marachi, then had a son called Kashyap. Kashyap had three wives known as Danu, Diti, and Aditi. Diti represented the earth and her children called Daityas. Danu represented the water or rain and her children called Danavas. The Daityas and the Danavas resided on earth and were a part of the first stage of creation. Together they were called the Assuras, the gods of the primordial world. However, the third wife of Kashyap, called Aditi, is the opposite of Diti. She represents the limitless skies and is the earliest sky goddess in the Hindu family. Now, her children, the Adityas, are celestial gods, also known as the Devas. Back then, the sky was laying upon the earth and they stayed in their respective locations. But during the second stage of creation, Indra, the king of the Devas and the god of thunder, propped up the sky and in doing so created the duality of heaven and earth. After this, the upper world became that of the Devas and the underworld became that of the Assuras. Now, according to the Rig Veda, which is basically an ancient collection of Hindu texts, the Asura started to have a negative connotation in later scriptures. And that's when a new word Sura is created to mean the opposite of that. Where Asuras became the personification of evil and darkness, Sura became the personification of light and divinity. Asuras are spirits depicted as power-hungry and lustful. Their skin is dark red or blue-green with 4 to 6 arms and 3 heads pointed in different directions. However, not all Asuras display those exact features. Now, in some translations, Asuras can also be a person who identifies with one's physical self only and runs after physical pleasure. You can see the clear similarities between the depictions of the Asuras and Sukuna, not only in outward appearances but also the nature of the deities themselves. This part is very interesting because Ishigori, who's an incarnated sorcerer from the past, said that sorcerers curse spirits, it doesn't matter. The only ones who are able to transcend being just merely strong are those with an overwhelming sense of self and a complete disregard for others, thus becoming natural disasters. For me, this totally lines up with the Asuras because they also display that overwhelming sense of self as well. What's also interesting is that Sukuna seems to be directly inspired by the god of the Devas known as Indra, with him being drawn holding Indra's weapon known as the Vajra in a cover for Jujutsu Kaisen. And of course him having the physical features of Indra and the Asuras as well, with him having 4 arms and 4 eyes. Not only that, in Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 199, Sukuna was referred to as the Fallen by an incarnated sorcerer called Angel. This is very significant because in Hindu mythology, Devas and Asuras were known to switch allegiances, with Devas descending to the underworld and Asuras choosing the path of the Devas. So let's say Sukuna's creation was influenced by Indra, the god of the sky, and the Devas. It could be that Gege's twist is that he fell from grace and chose the path of the Asuras, thus earning the name of the Fallen. Now, of course, Sukuna was stated to be a human initially, so I'm not saying that he came from a species of gods. That's where Gege's twist on the character would come in, since it can't be a one-to-one comparison, or else that would just be plagiarism. Another influence on the creation of Sukuna and Yuji would be the story of Abbe Nosai. In Japanese mythology, it's said that the poet hero Abbe no Yasuna was one day walking in the temple of the rice god Inari, reciting his poems aloud. A party of nobles then passed by in pursuit of a fox. They were after the fox because of its liver, which was used in medicine. The fox then ran into the temple garden, stopping near Abbe, who caught the animal and hid it in the folds of his kimono. The pursuers gave up the chase and left the area, and Abbe freed the fox. A year later, Abbe fell in love with a beautiful woman called Kuzunoha, who gave birth to a boy called Abbe Nosai. Sometime after his birth, she died of a fever, but not before noticing that her son had gained her fox-like powers. 3 days after her death, she appeared to her husband in a dream telling him not to weep and that she was the fox he had saved earlier. So pretty much the woman he married was the fox he saved earlier. She just has the power to transform into a fox since she's a kitsune. Now later on in life, Same became a disciple of Kamo Yasunori, one of the most important diviners of the Heian court. Same later became so powerful and skilled at his work that it wasn't long before he took over the entire astrology and divination division. He then gained a position of an onmyoji, which is just another name for sorcerers and magicians. These magicians also had a school where they taught this practice and worked hand in hand with the government to exorcise spirits and bad omens. Now Abbe Nosai specifically had his own detractors, one of his greatest enemies being Ashia Domen, who was also an onmyoji from the Heian era. At the end of this story, Domen was able to unalive Same with the help of his wife who betrayed him, but Same was later brought back to life and exacted his revenge on Domen and his unfaithful wife. A lot did happen before that, but it wasn't necessary for this video. However, the story as a whole does tie into Yuji and Sukuna's backstory, since in chapter 215, Sukuna said that Yuji looks like that guy from Harima. Harima being the province in Japan that held these sorcerers. Also in chapter 214, Sukuna says, right, the brat is from back then, and then said Kenjaku's shore is twisted, and this was after witnessing the strength of Yuji. Now initially Sukuna didn't know what Yuji was or where it was from, as seen when he first took control of his body. However, it's later said that incarnated sorcerers will gain access to their vessel's memories, which means that likely applies to Yuji as well. Which means that Sukuna might be able to access memories even Yuji isn't able to access himself. Now of course, I know that Yuji isn't 1,000 years old since we saw him as a baby, but that doesn't mean that Kenjaku didn't use something that was 1,000 years old to create him, because we know Kenjaku is his father, somewhat. This also somewhat ties into the Yokar epic of the native Anu people of Japan, which refers to a sword called Itadori Maru. The obvious implication there would be the name Itadori, which is the last name of Yuji, the protagonist. What's interesting here is that the Anu people were mentioned in volume 0 of Jujutsu Kaisen, and they may reside in the Hokkaido province of Japan, which was left out of the Culling games due to it being sacred lands. So it's very possible that we might see them later on in the story. Now it's also said that the Itadori Maru has 4 spirits, the wolf, the fox, and 2 dragons. Now this gives further credence to the influence of this tale, since wolves can run 50 meters in 3 seconds, and in the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen, Yuji stated to be able to run 50 meters in 3 seconds. Not only that, in chapter 132 when Yuji was chasing down Mahito, the manga depicted this scene as Yuji being the white wolf acting as the predator, and Mahito being the rabbit acting as the prey. Then it also showed a black wolf on the next panel when Kenjaku arrived. This could be implying that the wolf spirit within Yuji came from Kenjaku since he's partially his father, and if Yuji is somewhat influenced by Abbe Nosai, that explains the fox spirit as well, since he gained that from his mother. Now the 2 dragons are still a little iffy for me personally, but it's stated that the 2 dragons are incarnations of the thunder god. Sugawara no Michizane is believed to be the thunder god, and he does exist in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, as he's stated to be the ancestor of Gojo and Yuta. Now Yuta and Yuji were both born in the same province, but there isn't anything that establishes a relation between the 2 characters in the manga itself. Now the third myth or legend that inspired the creation of Sukuna is the story of Ryumen Sukuna himself. There was an urban myth from 2005 where construction site workers found a 2-meter wooden box in the back of a sealed room of an old temple. Coincidentally, this was located in the Iwate prefecture of Japan, where Gege Akutami was born. The box they found was aged, dark, and sealed shut with nails. It had wrappings, and one of the wrappings had a tag which said Ryumen Sukuna is sealed here. The construction workers contacted a priest, and the priest told them not to open the box, but before he could get there, 2 students opened the box overnight. 2 workers found the box open the other day and was so shocked at what was inside that they couldn't even speak. Inside the box was a mummified corpse with 2 heads, 4 arms and 4 legs. The priest then arrived and informed everyone that it was too late for them, and he was indeed correct. Weeks after the priest took the box and left, all the individuals that were at the construction site came down with unusual illnesses, and some met an unfortunate end. One of the guys involved with the incident called the son of the priest, since he was responsible for the box, and asked him why this was happening. The priest's son explained that way back in the 19th century, a guy named Menonobe Tengoku bought conjoined twins at a freak show. They had 2 heads, 4 arms, and 4 legs. He bought them and locked them in a room with people who had unusual deformities. This guy Tengoku was a part of a religious sect and took interest in the conjoined twins because they reminded him of the Asura, which I mentioned earlier on in this video. Now, after Tengoku threw the twins into the room with the other deformed humans, he stabbed all of them except for the twins and locked them up in there with no food so that they would have no choice but to eat each other to survive. This was a special Japanese ritual called Kodoku, where sorcerers would mix several insects in a jar and let them kill each other until only one survived. The fluid of the surviving insect would then be used to inflict a curse upon an individual. However, this guy decided to do that ritual using humans instead. He then only opened the door after one survivor was left, that survivor being the conjoined twins. Tengoku was so happy about this that he starved the twins and mummified them alive so that their body wouldn't decompose. The corpses then wrapped up and became the cursed Buddha, now used as a symbol for their religious sect, and because it reminded them of the demon god Ryumin Sukuna, they named the corpse as such. Now, this might be a little confusing since I said that was the story of Ryumin Sukuna, yet they named him after Ryumin Sukuna. Well, that's because the real life Ryumin Sukuna is an actual person that existed in Japanese history and was later mythified. The real Sukuna was a leader, but the Yamato family sought to overthrow him through an hostile takeover. To justify all the violence the Yamato family instilled, they spread propaganda that depicted Sukuna as evil. The story created by Yamatos was that Sukuna disrespected the imperial family. He was also said to have murdered thousands of people with the use of only a bow and arrow combined with his super strength. This almost demon-like image of Sukuna continued to spread and grow larger and larger over time. But Ryumin Sukuna has a completely different relation to the people in the Haida region, who praise him as a guardian and even as a benevolent figure in history. They believe that Ryumin Sukuna was the reincarnation of mercy itself. This connection was later backed up by the mummified version of Sukuna in the background of a Jujutsu Kaisen cover. That's a real process called Soku Shinbutsu, where Japanese monks would mummify themselves alive so that their bodies would not decompose and they would die and reach enlightenment. This could also explain how Sukuna died back then, since he wasn't defeated by the Jujutsu sorcerers. Now, there are other stories you guys could look into that might lead you back into this manga, and one such story being the battle between Indra and Vitra the serpent, and that might give us some clues as to what's going to happen next. But it's very loose and requires a lot of reaching, which I'm unable to do at this time after absorbing that much information. It was fun digging into these stories and legends that absolutely terrify me, but it was also very interesting. With that being said though, let me know what you guys think about the video in the comment section down below, and also let me know if you guys would like to see more videos just like this one. Check out my video on the return of Noboren, how she can stop Sukuna. It will be pinned in the end screen. So I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace out.